Good afternoon. I'm Darcy Bakigard with Prairie Public, and today joining me is rockstar Montana teacher Nikki Vredenberg. Hey, Nikki.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk parent communication today.
I am too, mostly because I was horrible at it as a high school teacher. I think I've said it many times. I would even admit it in interviews when people would ask me, like, what is your weakness? I would say, honestly, it's communicating with parents. I have 125 kids. I don't think in 10 years of teaching that I ever developed a good method. I did get better at it. And I now have some things that I have found, for me, some easy tech tools. But I'm excited to talk to you because I think you were actually good at this and you have some systems. Because we do know, all the research does show us that, as Sharon Anderson notes, that parents really can help you learn a lot about how to meet your students' needs. So if you know your students, you can better serve your students.
I would agree. When I first started teaching, I don't think I was very good at parent communication.
Okay.
And I to being terrified of parents. And terrified of how to talk to them and what they wanted to know.
Yeah.
What I've learned since becoming a parent is that it's the same on both sides. There are a lot of parents who are also terrified of teachers, and comes from maybe past experiences or some intimidation, or I think we both probably could do better. Both groups could do better at communicating with one another.
That's a good reminder that parents come with their own education baggage and maybe some of their own education fears. If high school wasn't great for them, I could see why they really wouldn't want to talk to the high school English teacher. Like, if they didn't like the high school English teacher when they were in high school, why are they going to want to chat with me? I like that point, that it's intimidating for parents. So how did you help make it easier? How did you start getting to that place where you felt more comfortable, and how did you help make it a bit easier for parents to communicate with you?
Well, I think it started for me was figuring out, first of all, how I could communicate with parents. What were the resources available to me, provided by my school? What could I feasibly do within a normal working day? And to right out from the gates, give that information to parents. And so it started with the beginning of the school year. I wrote a postcard to the students, but because I was working with kindergarten and first graders, obviously their parents were the ones reading that postcard to them, to introduce myself, and to invite them to come bring their school supplies to school the day before school started. That was followed up about a week later. This all began this time of year in early August. That was followed up about a week later with a phone call to each family.
You called all your parents?
Yeah, but remember, most of my biggest class size was 18. So
okay, that makes me feel better. I was like, oh my God, how long were you in school?
And it's still a lot of families. But it was easier to call 10 or 15 families. And sometimes I had duplicates. Often I had brothers and sisters and twins, and sometimes I could cover multiple students with one phone call. And mostly I just left a lot of telephone messages. But it was really just me having them hear my voice, again, inviting them to come to drop off school supplies and opening up those lines of communication. So that was the second layer. Then I sat down and got the main list from the office of parents and emails, and created that group of emails within my email account. In Gmail, it's fairly easy. It's called a label, and you go in and just into your contacts, create a label, and hit the checkbox next to whoever you want in that label. In Microsoft 365, depending on your administrative settings, it's harder to make groups. So working within that environment, I have all of my emails in a spreadsheet, and then I just copy and paste a group from the spreadsheet into an email. then once I have all those parents in an email, I send an introductory email. So they've gotten 3 introductions. They've gotten something in the snail mail, they've gotten a voicemail, and now they're getting an email. So
Okay.
now that sort of sets them up for, hey, she's going to mail us stuff, and she's going to call us, and she's going to email us. And I didn't mail things a lot in the snail mail in the beginning of my career when people snail mailed more. I did, but there is physical paper going home with students, and so that's really what that is represented.
Sure. You've got backpacks that are going home, and you mostly taught kindergarten through first grade. So there's more. I found at the high school level that if I tried to send something physical home, it was a slim chance. And it was an assignment, unless it was something that was worth points in the grade book. A lot of high schoolers didn't take it home. But that was one way I communicated with parents. Now that I think about it, I have always done this. I had a one sheet that was the first assignment of the year that introduced me. It had my contact information and how I preferred to be contacted. Because for me, getting a phone call was very challenging. I had a standing policy. I didn't answer my phone while I was teaching, which annoyed the office sometimes because sometimes they needed a kid, but they would just page my classroom then. But otherwise, I didn't know if it was the office calling, and my phone was on the other side of my classroom. So it was often kind of disruptive to answer my phone. So I always let parents know that I really prefer email, that if there's any way they can email me, they're going to get a response faster through email. But I would send a one sheet home that would just introduce me, the class, some basic class objectives. I tried to have on there like general target, like this time of year, we will be doing a research paper that is a very important assignment for many, many points. Like I would try to give them just kind of some time frames of when things were happening, but it was very general. And then the bottom was the student had to sign it and some guardian had to sign it. And then they would bring that back, and that was their first assignment in the grade book. So I guess I did open the line of parent communication at least by sending that home. But I found in general, if I just wanted to send home like a class newsletter that would have just been information for parents, that's not making it out of a locker. There would have been like 10 students out of 100 that would actually take that home. Versus in the elementary school level where you have a home folder system that it goes in that home folder and then that goes home and there's like a routine of that.
And that routine is such a crucial part of what we do. A lot of our time at the beginning of the day and the end of the day was about getting that paperwork home and in the right place. And for that reason, a lot of the older kids, if their parents knew that the younger kid could get things home, the office would send family information home with my kids instead of sending it home with the older kids, knowing that it would get there. And a lot of kindergartners would bring like their older brothers and sisters lunch money and permission slips because that routine was part of our day and they knew it would get there.
But what a powerful routine for the kids, but also for the parents, because I think this connects to your first point of showing them communicating with you is important to me. We're going to have systems of communication. So I'm snail mailing you, and in the future, snail mail is probably going to come via your kid, not via the post office. But I'm going to email you, and we're going to have some electronic communication. And as needed, I'm going to call you, and you can call me when you need things. So in addition, you set that routine for the kids, but to some extent, you were also setting that routine and those expectations in parents of like, here's how this is going to work for this year.
Right. The other thing I did was I let parents know I had a classroom website, and that was a requirement of every staff member at our school. And we were required to keep that website updated weekly with content that we were teaching or things that were happening and things like that. So I had a routine in my schedule, and I had a prep time schedule. So when my kids went to specials, that was my prep time. And so Wednesdays, my kids went to art, and that was a little bit longer. And so that was the day I updated my website. And I let parents know on Wednesday, look for that update. But I didn't trust that they would remember that. So my routine was update the website and then go to email, where in the signature line of my email was the link to that website. So every email my parents got from me, that link showed up in there. So I would very quickly, after I updated the website, go in, put in the group, my parents' group, write website update in the subject line, write one sentence, I've just updated the website, find the link in my signature line, and click send. And that took maybe less than a minute. I think I timed it one time just because I was bragging to somebody. In that way, it guaranteed that they saw. I wasn't going to put all this work into updating the website and then have no one read it. So, and I also included my principal in that group, so that every communication that I sent to parents, the principal was carbon copied on it. And I also included any specialists that worked with my kids, a music teacher.
What a great reminder. Oh my gosh. Because those people are, for so many kids, they are that kid's life raft during the day. I really like that tip, particularly, of just have admin and that support staff in there as well. I haven't mentioned, all of the resources that are on the slides coming up, these are all in the parent resource packet that is linked in the video description. And within each slide, these are hyperlinked to different resources. So as you were talking about your class website, I came here. I've used SharePoint, which I personally didn't care for. I found it a little clunky. But when I was at West Fargo, we had switched to Schoology, which is a learning management system, but also allowed me to it had a built-in calendar and it has built-in class folders. And I ended up using that much more like my classroom website. And that was the link that parents had access to. And we were required not to maintain a website, but we were required to post our lesson plans each week. And we had a couple options of where to post our lesson plans, but I used the Schoology calendar feature, and I just told my kids, every Sunday, on Sunday, there will be a PowerPoint slide deck, and I used that slide deck in class. So for me, you were talking about systems of like, how do we help ourselves communicate easier? I did have this system where I would do my slide deck, and that's what I was projecting on my board in the class. So when kids came in, it had the learning objective for the day, and it had our agenda, like what we're going to be doing. And then any resources I was sharing in class were right in that slide deck, which was organized for me, because now when I'm teaching, all I have to do is go to that next slide in the deck, and the video that I wanted to show is right there. And that worksheet that I wanted to share out is right there. And then the next slide, there was always a slide that said homework and had the day. And then it listed like, what are you supposed to be doing? What do you need to finish? And I always looked at it much more as a resource for students, particularly my students who were absent. If they were gone, this was one place where I had linked all of the resources that we were using for the week were linked in this document. They could also find them on Schoology because these individual assignment sheets would be posted, but this was kind of a one-stop shop. But I think that was actually probably helpful for parents as well, because a parent could also check that and go, oh, this is what they're working on this week in English 4. Or whatever. But I like that reminder of if we have systems. So my system was every Sunday. Sometimes I got it built by Friday afternoon. Like I would try to use my Friday prep period to prep my next slide deck so that it was ready for the next week. But sometimes that would end up being part of my Sunday afternoon. But
Yeah.
that was kind of a 2-for-1 because I was prepping this parent contact information, but I was also prepping and making my life easier the next week because all of my resources were in one spot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. The other thing that I had in the last 6 years I was in the classroom, I got into blogging with my students and
cool.
having kids. We created it. We used Kid Blog in the first years, and then that became a little less user friendly for my little guys.
Okay.
So we tried some different platforms. The blog for me was a real window into our classroom, and it was a real student-driven way to communicate with parents about what we were doing, because the kids were posting reflections about their work, pictures of their work, updates about things that we were doing, and that was going home in real time. Right now I'm helping teachers use an application called Seesaw, which most people are pretty familiar with. And then the connection with Seesaw is that a parent will get an email every time their child posts something. And so they'll be sitting at work and a notification will come across and they can see their child's work. And then they have the option of commenting on that work as well. And so my first weeks of school, the last years I was in the classroom, was also setting up that blog right away and getting parents the link to that blog, getting parents that information. That was another link I had in the signature line of my email. So there was visit our classroom website, and then there was visit our classroom blog. And obviously when they went to the website, it was linked to the blog too, so that there was they could see that. And we tried to post something in the beginning. We were just going for weekly posts as we were sharing devices, and we didn't have our own set of anything. So I would have a designated part of the day where we would make sure that the writing for that day got posted, or a math problem from that day got posted. As we acquired more devices at our school, and my room eventually became a one-to-one classroom, we could post almost daily. And so then we had, from September to June, a beautiful digital portfolio, a running time-stamped record of a child and their progress. And then I really didn't need to update my website as much about the content we were learning.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like with the students doing the blog and the students sharing what they were doing, how much did you even have to post yourself?
Often I would change the way I posted. I would say, you may have noticed some projects on blog posts about this project, and here's what was expected of the students. And parents really liked that, because one thing that comes about those posts is that they are sort of blind, and a parent's not sure, did my student meet expectations? Was this what they were supposed to be doing?
Okay.
And so sometimes an explanation of what the assignment was and what they were asked to do provides a little more clarity into what they're getting. So I would often use the website to point to the blog. And so that would be maybe a section. And my website the last few years was a Google site that, every week I opened up the template, and there were some things that were always there, and then just other things that I would just quickly change a line or two. But it really did, I still updated it because I was required to. But it was more just explaining or defining what parents were seeing on the blog.
I like that. I like the idea, though, that it sounds like some of the burden, and it shouldn't feel like a burden because it's our job, and like it's very exciting to share that with parents. But for me, I think I always felt like this is just overwhelming. Like I can't plan and grade and coach and like do this other thing. I knew it was important, but it was just lower on my priority list. But I like your idea. It sounds like you were able to kind of offload some of the responsibility onto the kids. But I love that now, instead of parent communication just being about communicating with parents, it's also building in student reflection.
Yeah.
Certainly, it could build in peer feedback and peers getting to see each other's learning and commenting on each other's learning. As you're talking, I'm thinking about how easy it would have been for me within each of my different sections, say for my senior English class, and I would have 3 different groups of seniors.
Mm-hmm.
I could have assigned different types of reflections to the different groups so that parents could see different types of media basically being produced that would be reflections on what we were learning. So the students are reflecting. I'm teaching them different content, like, all right, first period for this month, you're writing a blog. Second period, while we're in this unit, you're going to be doing Snapchat style posts of taking a picture and then annotating like why this was important and what it meant. And then you're going to be posting those kind of like a photo journal. And then fifth period, you're going to be doing video blogs of reflections and interviews. And then each month I could have rotated who was doing what. But now parents aren't seeing, because I certainly could have also just done it this month, we're all blogging.
Yeah.
Parent standpoint, and also from a student standpoint, I think it would be interesting for first period who wrote written blogs to look at fifth period's videos and second period's snap, like photojournalists perspective, and see how they're learning and what the kids in other sections are talking about. Because I often found that the conversation period to period would be very different depending on the makeup, who was in the class. The kids in the classroom made it so different. So I like this idea that you were able to curate a system that kids were doing more of the work, but you didn't make it busy work. It was academic, like they're reflecting on their learning and then showing their learning to their parents.
Well, and it was also for me, and a lot of teachers ask me about it, it's the process. It's not a finished product. And it was really important that parents see a kindergartner's writing in the process, you know, with the mistakes, with the word things crossed out and things written beside them. And a lot of teachers have asked me about, oh, but anything we produce, anything we publish or anything parents see needs to look perfect. And my feeling was no, because we can't monitor growth if we don't show the things, the learning in the process. Part of the discussion I'll have with parents in the beginning of the year too, when I introduce the blog and talk about what they're going to see on the blog, and what their role in being a blog reader is, which is it's not to get worried about the product, you know, but it's to celebrate the process.
That's really cool. But then what, like you said, you have this virtual journal of the whole year. So yes, this entry that a student did in September might feel like, ugh. But when you compare that entry to what the kid is producing in May, now that process really unfolds and you get to see how beautiful that growth was. And yeah, I like it's far less intimidating too, the idea. I think we put too much pressure on ourselves as teachers to be perfect and to have perfect classrooms and perfect lesson plans and nothing can go wrong and in all of these things. And that to some extent, I mean, that has to trickle down to kids a little bit. Like if I am so terrified of something going wrong in my classroom, what am I modeling for my learners about how I handle mistakes or how I handle things not going well? Like learning is messy.
Right. And it takes several attempts to get it right.
Yeah. 10 years in, we're having a conversation about communicating with parents and I'm learning all kinds of new things.
I know.
Like learning is messy, but you keep trying and you get better at what you're doing. So I like that emphasis too for reminding parents, not everything your kid does is going to be perfect. They're learning.
Right. And if we establish that from the beginning, you know, from the beginning of the year, we have their attention at the beginning of the year because everybody's fresh and new and everybody's ready to start the year right. So it's really important that we use that attention. At the same time, I think there are so many ways we can communicate with parents that it's important that we don't overburden ourselves trying to use too many tools. You know, we've got a lot suggested here. Um, I wouldn't recommend that any teacher use all of these things. You know, I think that having a variety of ways to reach parents so that you never really get 100% reach with any one tool. But I think we could stretch ourselves too thin if we don't choose tools that work within our comfort zone and within the way our workflow is.
I think that's true. And I also, like, to add on to that of the workflow, I also think of the workflow for students and parents. So
Mm-hmm.
at West Fargo, we were an Office 365 Microsoft school.
Mm-hmm.
I preferred, just personally, this is not a paid endorsement, but I like working with Google. I think it's just a little bit easier. I had gotten used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And some teachers did have separate Google accounts and wanted students to communicate that way.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there is something responsible and respectful of students and parents to try to duplicate systems when it is possible. So if you absolutely hate something that your school is using and like SharePoint just isn't working, and you have a way, you can link from the required SharePoint page to a nicer EduBlog or something that, or your Seesaw page that you want, but you can house a link to it in your SharePoint. I think there is something respectful about honoring the fact that parents might be used to finding everything on the school SharePoint pages. So you having something else can be confusing for them.
Right.
But I think figure out a way to use that. But if 3 other teachers in your school are already using Seesaw, maybe consider giving Seesaw a shot, because then the students, because I'm also thinking about training kids to learn a tool like that or to learn a blogging tool. Well, if they learn Seesaw with you in kindergarten, if I'm the first grade teacher, man, that's a no-brainer for me. I'm going to use Seesaw because I know those kids already know how to use it and their parents already know how to use it. So I do think there's strength in simplifying for ourselves, but also strength in simplifying for our users. Like how many different systems are we asking parents and students to track and follow?
Right. And so to that point, I think it is good to maybe head out into the hall and talk to your colleagues and find out how.
You want me to leave my classroom?
Maybe for a minute, I think it wouldn't hurt to. I've heard frustrated parents talk about, having Google Classroom in one classroom and Schoology in another classroom and all these different systems to manage as a parent. Imagine how hard it is for the kids that if we pop our heads out and talk to our colleagues, and we might learn some great new ideas for one thing, but then we might also agree on a couple of systems that will work for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that's a reasonable approach. It doesn't mean that in my classroom, I'm not going to also use, some other tool. I'm going to use Socrative to do something. So that's a good example. I used Socrative a lot to do online quizzes and games in my classroom. And then as a school system, we switched to Schoology, I was able to transfer a lot of those things that I had created on Socrative into Schoology, not because it was easier for me, because everything already existed in Schoology in Socrative. And so I had to transfer it over, but it was easier for kids. And it was just better for kids. It was one less link. It was one less place that they had to go. But there was nothing wrong with me using Socrative. And certainly I could have continued to use that. But the streamlining for kids is helpful. In this resource packet, we've provided some general connection tips. You talked about you're sending a postcard or a letter home. There was a beautiful post that I saw on Facebook. So this is completely stolen from another teacher, but she sent a request to have parents send letters. And when I talked to you about this earlier this summer, you said you did this too, and that parents wrote back to you. But this teacher posted on Facebook that they asked parents, write me a letter about your kid. Tell me what they're like. Tell me, what are their hopes and dreams? Like, there would be a lot of different ways to get information from parents. And then she would get these letters and read those. And I think she also then would save them and like give them to kids when they would graduate. And I don't know how she had that system in place, but I feel like you also said that you did this.
I did. Because I had the younger kids, I got, for some of my families, this was the very first time their kid had been outside of their home and cared for by somebody they didn't know.
Sure.
Or for some of my families, it was the first time that child had left, a daycare situation where they were comfortable and knew that person and had been used to having lots of regular conversations with that person, and into this new environment where they, it was a public school. They really didn't get to choose where their kid went to school.
Right.
And I was the only K-1 teacher in that building. So they were stuck with me. And I think a lot of them are just bursting with wanting you to know everything about their kid, all the really important things. And any parent will tell you what they really want is for you to like their kid, and for you to tell them you like their kid. And I understood that a lot better when I became a parent and suddenly started taking the greatest thing I'd ever created in my life and handing it to a stranger every day. That feeling was really clear for me. And so I would give my parents an opportunity to tell me what they felt I needed to know about their kid. And I had a very simple sheet that I had copied out of some teacher created materials workbook that said hopes and dreams. And it just said, tell me your hopes and dreams for your child, not just this school year, but in life, and then what else do you think I need to know? And, some parents wouldn't fill it out. Some parents would just give me a few lines, and others would fill one page and fill the back of it and then attach and staple another page with the things their child liked to do and the things that upset their child and the things that they loved about their child. And I would read them and I would cry. Because they were very touching, and you could feel the love that these parents had for their kids and how important to them it was for me to know that. And so I kept that stuff in a filing cabinet, and I would maybe read it before parent-teacher conferences again in November to reacquaint myself. Yeah, with this, because for us to start in September and then not actually have formal parent conferences until right before Thanksgiving, that was a long time.
Yeah.
Between interactions. And so it was really important that I had a lot of informal interactions between there. But then in November, it was nice to remind myself of where we started and, what this parent wanted me to know in the beginning. And that sometimes helped me plan what I was going to say to them at the conference too.
That's great. And then you can frame any feedback you have kind of in light of some of those hopes or dreams or some of their concerns about their kid. You can address those concerns specifically.
Right. And acknowledging what they wrote was important too, because obviously if you pour that kind of work and effort into that document, it's nice to have it acknowledged.
Well, and there's nothing quite as powerful as feeling heard and feeling like someone has heard you. And I would imagine, I love your visual of taking the greatest thing that you've ever created and handing it over to someone else. And I think if we reminded ourselves of that more as teachers, we would really embrace the power of communicating with parents, of remembering this is that person's like greatest love, and they're now in our hands. And at the high school level, particularly my students who were also involved in theater, I saw those kids more in a day, many days, than their parents saw them. Because I would see some of those theater kids in class and then for hours after school.
Yeah.
And the parents saw them for 15 minutes in the morning. And then by the time a kid is a senior in high school, they're driving themselves. They don't even have the ride in the car in the morning to chat and catch up. So it's quick back and forth in the kitchen on the way out the door. They're in school all day. They're at theater rehearsal all afternoon and sometimes into the evening. and
Yeah.
then the kid is doing homework. So
Mhm.
I might have gotten 3 hours of this teenager's life, which doesn't sound like that much in the course of a day, but a parent, for a busy teenager, that parent might have only gotten an hour with
Right.
their kid that day. And I did try to remind myself of that when I would have parents who wanted to be involved
Mhm.
in things, and me kind of feeling like, I don't know that I need your help. Like, I don't know. But if I reminded myself, like, they want to be involved because this is an opportunity for them to spend time with their kid, it
Mhm.
was easier for me to say, yes, it would be great if you could help coordinate some suppers during rehearsal. It would be great if you would help and get character, kid bios and post them in the entryway for the theater project. I
Mhm.
don't know. I can't remember having parents wanting to volunteer like in my classroom. They weren't as interested in my English teaching, but they were very interested in being involved in this extracurricular activity that
Mhm.
their child was tremendously passionate about.
Right.
And there was that, sometimes that felt overwhelming for me.
Right.
But if I remind myself of what you just said, and then look at, they just want to spend time with their kid. And how can you fault a parent for loving their kid so much that they just want to be around them more?
Or know what they're doing when they're not with.
Yeah, and know what they're doing. And so one of our tips on this create a connection is think about, is there a way that parents could be involved? Um, I'm not lucky enough to have that little creature yet, but I have nieces and nephews, and my brother is lucky that their kids' teachers are very active in inviting them to serve as chaperones for different school outings, and some of that is just obvious.
Mm.
But I think for me at least, and this is my North Dakota upbringing, I sometimes feel guilty asking for help. And I feel like parents are so busy, they don't have time to do this. Like, I can't ask them to do things. And what I'm experiencing watching my siblings as parents and watching these theater parents particularly is they're kind of waiting for that invitation
Mhm.
from us as educators. They're waiting for that opportunity of what's a meaningful way, whether it's like, hey, collect your toilet paper rolls because we're using them from a project. And
Uh-huh.
like, that is something that I can contribute. Um,
Yes.
or, it's donuts for dads and muffins for moms, and we have this field trip and we need some chaperones. Um,
Mhm.
I think parents are eager to just be involved. And they, like you said, I forget that they're also kind of scared and uncomfortable. And so they do need me as the teacher to say, here is a way that you can be involved.
Yeah.
Here, we have reading hour
Mhm.
every day from this time to this time, and we're looking for people to be mentor readers with our kids. You will not be paired with your own child, but
Mhm.
we're looking for mentor readers to read with kids.
Mhm.
And see what happens. I know that opens up a lot of like background check challenges and like, who do we allow in the school, and there are some logistics to consider there, but
Mhm.
um, I just think that you're so right that they're giving us their heart and they're asking us to educate it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
And what a great thing that we get to do. And I also would remind myself that when a kid was driving me crazy.
Yeah, the hopes and dreams papers came in handy in that case too. Was let me see
Yeah,
this child the way his mom sees him. Let me remind myself that this is
right.
one's treasure.
This child is invaluable and I need to calm down.
Right, right.
As you go through this packet, if you want more information about any of these tips or tricks, we didn't get into a lot of specifics, but there are some general things to consider, some in-person and kind of snail mail type communication possibilities, some tips and recommendations for websites and learning management systems that you could consider. This page is content management systems. They're all a little bit different, but in general, they function pretty similarly, where you can assign students tasks. They can work on class activities, and then those can be shared kind of in a Facebook-like fashion with parents who are members of your class, so they can see the class log. I think that's is that a fair summary of
Right.
them?
Yeah.
These are slightly quicker connections with parents. So thinking about having a classroom Twitter, and this is another great way to teach students. The blog and Twitter, any of these are also great tools to teach students about digital citizenship and our expectations for them and how to interact with people online. What are the expectations? But in addition, it's offering students an authentic audience for publishing their work. So now, instead of just us as the educators seeing it, they know that other people are going to be able to see this, whether it's grandma and grandpa or mom and dad or a peer. They know that other people can see this. All of those systems that we talked about here, they have settings so that what the student shares can remain private, that just you and the student or you and the student's parents can see it. So you have control over who sees what, but it still gives you that authentic audience. These are a bit quicker. I personally really liked Remind at the high school level. I used this because my high schoolers did not use email. Millennials, no go on the email. I learned it's like a dead zone for them. But if I wanted my students and their parents to know about something quickly, I used Remind because it was a text feature that would just send a text message to them. I had my account set up that they could not text me back. I still, students knew that I wanted email communication because I wanted everything not on my private device, but on my school device. That was important to me at the high school level for that. But the Remind is an opt-in. So I would tell parents, if you want to receive my class texts, here's the code. You text a code and then you're automatically enrolled in that class. So now any text that I sent, parents just get, but so did my students, the way I had it set up. And this was great because I could set up reminders ahead of time. So otherwise I would forget to remind people. So I had to remind myself to send a reminder for things. But I really liked Remind, and Bloom's works pretty similarly. And I think you could accomplish a lot of the same stuff by using a classroom Twitter. And then the end of the packet just has some other articles, kind of reminders about why this is important, but also some additional strategies that we didn't talk about all of those things. You give me hope, you make me feel like I would be capable of communicating with parents if I had just thought about some of your recommendations for some of the systems that you have in place. I think I could have been much better about having a system for myself and how I share student work and what we're doing in my classroom back, even with juniors, the parents of juniors and seniors.
Well, thank you. And it's nice to hear you talk about it at the upper grade level and thinking about the students and just how much time they're spending away from their families with curricular and during the day. And for your students, those are the final years they're with their parents, and I'm sure that isn't lost on them either, that, they've had them for all this time, and that anxiety about not having them around so much is probably there too.
Yeah, it is. That's a great, And for the seniors, you could see the beginning of the year, they were always very I'm a senior. But by the spring, by April and the beginning of May, you could see that students were experiencing that same anxiety about being away from home and starting to leave that journey. And so I think and I would imagine for a kindergartner, how terrifying that transition is as a little person coming into that new space. If we have good communication with parents, we can really just be nurturing that child, in school and at home, and helping them know that we've got your back. And we're on the same team, and we're going to get you through what feels like a scary and stressful situation.
Absolutely. We're all better together. That's for sure.
Yeah. And anything that we can do that's in the service of helping educate kids and be better at that main mission is just helpful. And I think that's my main takeaway from why I need to communicate with parents, even when it feels daunting, that if I communicate with parents well, it will help me teach my students better.
Right. Well said. It's a good wrap up there.
All right. Well, then we'll leave it at that. If you are watching the video for continuing ed credit, make sure you fill out the video viewing form, which is also in the video description link at the bottom, and fill out that quick form to get credit for these hours. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, North Dakota teachers, check out prairiepubliceducation.org/PD for me and learn all about how you can earn continuing education credit for watching this and other PD for Me weekly web chat videos. Thanks for being here, Nikki.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was fun. I could talk to you all day.
Me too, but we'll end it here. All right. Thanks.